Imagine this, it's 1940. Britain is losing, bombs are falling, morale is collapsing, and instead of standing at a podium, Winston Churchill leans into a microphone, clears his throat, and says, "Welcome back. Today we're talking about survival." Not a speech, not a broadcast, a podcast. Intimate, unfiltered, direct, and somehow the fate of a nation depends on whether people keep listening. This sounds absurd until you realize that Churchill already behaved like a podcast host long before podcasts existed. He understood something modern creators obsess over, that attention is power, narrative is oxygen, and a voice, used correctly, can outfight tanks. Before the war made him famous, Churchill was not the obvious hero of history. He was controversial, frequently wrong, politically sidelined, and often ignored. For years, he was treated like a relic, too verbose, too dramatic, too intense. In modern terms, he'd be called off-brand. But obscurity taught him something essential. If no one listens, nothing you say matters. And if people do listen, everything changes. Churchill trained his voice the way influencers train their presence. He practiced pacing, he rehearsed pauses, he rewrote sentences until they sounded inevitable. He believed that language wasn't decoration, it was weaponry. Each word had to earn its place, each phrase had to land like a punch or a promise. When war arrived, Britain didn't just need weapons, it needed coherence. Fear was fragmented, information was chaotic, rumors spread faster than facts. This is the exact environment where podcasts thrive today. Moments of uncertainty where people crave not just updates, but meaning. Churchill didn't flood the public with constant noise. He chose moments. He showed up when it mattered. And when he spoke, it felt personal, as if he were addressing you alone in a dark room. His broadcasts weren't optimistic, they were honest to the point of brutality. He told people things would get worse, he described loss before victory. That honesty built trust, and trust built endurance. Modern creators call this authenticity. Churchill called it respect for the audience. But here's the unsettling part. Churchill wasn't just informing people, he was shaping their emotional reality. He controlled the rhythm of despair and hope. He decided when to let silence speak. In today's terms, he understood retention. He knew that if people emotionally checked out, the war was already lost. And that raises a dangerous question, one that doesn't belong safely in the past. If a single voice, delivered regularly, calmly, and convincingly, could hold together an entire nation under bombardment, what does that say about the power of modern voices today? Because if Churchill were alive now, with a microphone, an RSS feed, and millions of subscribers, would he be remembered as a statesman or as the most influential The microphone doesn't just transmit sound, it collapses distance. And in wartime Britain, distance was deadly. People weren't just separated from leaders, they were separated from certainty. In that vacuum, fear multiplies. What Churchill instinctively understood, and what modern podcasters sometimes stumble into by accident, is that consistency calms chaos. Section 2 begins with a strange truth. Churchill didn't speak often, and that restraint was deliberate. In an age when silence could be mistaken for weakness, he weaponized absence. Each broadcast felt like an event. You didn't scroll past it, you leaned in. When his voice arrived, it cut through static, sirens, and doubt. Not because it was loud, but because it was rare. He structured his speeches the way today's best long-form creators structure episodes. First, grounding. This is where we are. Then, confrontation. This is how bad it is. Then, meaning. This is why it matters. He didn't rush to hope, he earned it. That pacing mattered. Too much optimism would have felt fake. Too much despair would have crushed morale. The balance kept people listening, emotionally invested, not overwhelmed. There's a misconception that leadership is about certainty. Churchill knew better. He openly admitted confusion, limits, even fear. But he never surrendered narrative control. He framed uncertainty as a shared burden. We don't know everything, he implied, but we know enough to continue. In modern terms, he turned vulnerability into credibility. Think about what that does to an audience. When a host acknowledges your anxiety instead of dismissing it, you don't feel weaker, you feel seen. And once people feel seen, they follow. Churchill wasn't commanding listeners from above. He was sitting with them in the dark, narrating what the dark meant. But there's a deeper layer here, one that's uncomfortable: repetition. Churchill repeated phrases, rhythms, even emotional beats across broadcasts. Today, repetition is called branding. Back then, it was psychological reinforcement. Over time, listeners internalized his cadence. His confidence became their confidence. His patience became their patience. This is where the line between reassurance and influence blurs. Because if a voice can stabilize emotions at scale, it can also steer them. The same tools that prevent panic can manufacture resolve. The same intimacy that builds trust can bypass skepticism. And that leads us to the unsettling core of this story. Churchill didn't just win attention, he owned it. In moments when people had no energy left to think, his voice did the thinking for them. So the question sharpens: if voice plus timing plus trust can carry a nation through bombs and ruin, what happens when those tools are used without restraint, without war, without accountability? By section 3, something subtle but dangerous has happened. The voice is no longer just information, it's authority. And authority, once accepted, changes how people think without them noticing. Churchill's genius wasn't just what he said, but when he said nothing. After disasters, retreats, bombings, losses at sea, there were pauses, days without explanation. That silence wasn't neglect, it was psychological triage. Let the shock settle. Let rumors burn themselves out. Then, only then, he returned, not to correct every falsehood, but to replace confusion with a single coherent story. This is something modern audiences rarely experience. Today, we are flooded with updates, reactions to reactions, commentary on commentary. In contrast, Churchill curated scarcity. When he spoke, it wasn't to chase the news cycle, it was to end it. He framed events not as isolated failures, but as chapters in a longer narrative. Losses became tests, retreats became preparations, suffering became proof of moral seriousness. This didn't change reality, but it changed how reality felt. And feeling in a crisis often matters more than facts. Here's the uncomfortable insight. Most people didn't need Churchill to be right, they needed him to be convincing. Certainty is comforting, even when it's incomplete. A calm voice can smooth over gaps in logic. A confident tone can turn speculation into belief. Churchill understood that people under stress don't analyze, they absorb. And absorption creates dependency. Listeners began to wait for his interpretation before forming their own. Not because they were foolish, but because thinking independently during constant danger is exhausting. Delegating meaning to a trusted voice is a survival strategy. Churchill became not just a leader, but a cognitive shortcut. This is where the podcast analogy becomes chillingly modern. The more time people spend with a voice, the more that voice shapes their internal monologue. Its phrases sneak into their thoughts, its assumptions feel natural. Over time, disagreement doesn't feel like disagreement, it feels like disloyalty. Churchill didn't invent this dynamic, but he mastered it under extreme conditions. And here's the twist. He was afraid of it. Privately, he worried about the power of rhetoric untethered from reality. He revised obsessively because he knew careless words could do irreversible damage. He treated language like explosives, necessary but dangerous. which raises a critical question for our era. If even Churchill feared the power of his own voice, what happens when today's voices don't? Because the modern microphone is always on, the audience is always listening, and the incentives reward outrage, certainty, and emotional manipulation, not restraint. So before we move forward, we need to confront the core paradox. The same voice that steadies a nation can also quietly train it not to question. By section 4, we have to confront the machinery behind the voice, because voices don't become powerful by accident, they are engineered. Churchill obsessed over sound, not volume, not theatrics, sound. He believed that how words landed in the ear mattered more than how they looked on paper. He dictated drafts aloud, listened to them, then rewrote them again and again. If a sentence felt clumsy to speak, it was deleted. If a pause didn't feel natural, the rhythm was rebuilt. This is strikingly modern. Today's most effective long-form audio creators don't write, they perform. They feel their way through pacing, emphasis, and silence. Churchill did the same thing, except the stakes weren't downloads or ad revenue. The stakes were national collapse. He deliberately used simple language, but not simplistic ideas. Short Anglo-Saxon words, strong verbs, few adjectives. The sentences moved like marching feet, steady, relentless, impossible to ignore. Listeners didn't just understand him, they felt carried forward by him. But here's the trick most people miss. Churchill wasn't trying to excite people, he was trying to stabilize them. Excitement burns out, calm endures. His delivery was controlled, almost conversational. It suggested competence, control, continuity. In modern terms, he wasn't chasing virality, he was building trust equity. And trust compounds. The more people trusted his voice, the more margin for error he gained. He could delay bad news without sparking panic. He could delay good news without losing credibility. That kind of relationship is rare and dangerous, because once established, it can survive contradictions, it can survive mistakes, sometimes it can even survive lies. This is where the podcast analogy becomes uncomfortable again. Long-form audio creates parasocial intimacy. You hear the same voice week after week, in private spaces, late at night, during stress. Over time, that voice starts to feel like company, and people are far less critical of company than of strangers. Churchill understood this intuitively. He didn't shout at Britain, he kept it company. But companionship has a cost. When a single voice becomes the emotional anchor for millions, alternative voices struggle to compete. Dissent sounds jarring, complexity feels like noise. The audience doesn't consciously reject other perspectives, they simply stop seeking them. This isn't propaganda in the crude sense, it's something more subtle, narrative gravity. Everything bends toward the dominant voice, not because it's enforced, but because it's familiar. And that leads to a quiet, unsettling realization. Britain didn't just survive because Churchill spoke well. It survived because people allowed one voice to organize their emotional reality. That worked this time, but history is full of moments where it didn't. So the question tightens again. When does a trusted voice stop being a guide and start becoming a gate? By section 5, the story pivots because every powerful voice eventually collides with its limits. Churchill's voice held Britain together during its darkest hours, but voices are not immortal. They age, they tire, and the moment the crisis changes, the same tone that once inspired resilience can suddenly feel out of place. As the war dragged on, something subtle shifted. The danger became routine. Bombs were still falling, but shock had hardened into endurance. The audience that once needed emotional triage now wanted practical answers: housing, jobs, food, the future. And Churchill, master of defiance and resolve, was less fluent in reconstruction and reform. This is a pattern modern creators know well. A voice that thrives in chaos often struggles in stability. Outrage performers fade when outrage ends. Crisis commentators lose relevance when crises become boring. Churchill's narrative strength was built for survival, not planning. And then came the moment that shocks people even today. After winning the war, he lost the election. Think about that. The voice that symbolized resistance, courage, and national survival was suddenly not what people wanted to hear anymore. Not because it had failed, but because the audience had changed. This is where the podcast metaphor becomes painfully accurate. Audiences don't stay forever, they evolve, their needs shift, and when a creator doesn't shift with them, loyalty evaporates faster than expected. Churchill's wartime authority didn't translate into peacetime trust. His voice was associated with sacrifice, not rebuilding, with endurance, not comfort. People didn't reject him, they outgrew him. And that reveals the most important lesson of all. Voice creates power, but context decides how long that power lasts. Churchill never stopped being eloquent, he never stopped being brilliant, but brilliance is situational. The microphone amplifies what the moment demands and punishes what it no longer needs. Which brings us to a final, uncomfortable realization. If even Churchill, the master of voice, timing, and trust, could be tuned out the moment the emotional environment shifted, what does that say about the permanence of influence today? Because modern platforms don't just amplify voices, they accelerate obsolescence. Yesterday's anchor becomes today's relic. So before we move on, we need to ask the hardest question yet. Was Churchill powerful because of who he was? By section 6, we stop talking about Churchill and start talking about the audience. Because influence doesn't live in the microphone, it lives in the listener. What made Churchill powerful wasn't just his skill, but a population primed to receive him. Britain in 1940 was unified by necessity. There were fewer voices, fewer platforms, fewer distractions. When he spoke, he wasn't competing with 1,000 alternatives. Attention wasn't fragmented, it was focused. Scarcity did half the work for him. That world no longer exists. Today, attention is liquid, it leaks constantly. Voices don't compete on truth or wisdom, they compete on speed, emotion, and repetition. The modern listener isn't gathered around a radio at a shared hour. They're alone, scrolling, skipping, multitasking. Influence now requires not just authority, but constant re-earning. And yet, the core mechanism hasn't changed. People still outsource meaning when overwhelmed. They still gravitate toward voices that sound calm during chaos. They still mistake familiarity for trust and confidence for competence. The tools are different, but the psychology is identical. Here's the dangerous part. Modern voices don't need to be right for long. They just need to be compelling now. Churchill had editors, institutional pressure, and historical consequences forcing restraint. Today's voices often have none of those breaks. The reward system favors immediacy over reflection, certainty over doubt. So imagine Churchill dropped into this ecosystem, not with one microphone, but infinite feeds. Would his careful pacing survive the algorithm? Would his pauses be punished as disengagement? Would his honesty be clipped into outrage? Or would he adapt, shorten, sharpen, polarize? That question matters because it flips the entire story. Maybe Churchill wasn't exceptional because he mastered the voice. Maybe he was exceptional because the environment forced responsibility onto the voice. Which leads to a disturbing conclusion. The real difference between then and now isn't talent, it's accountability. When words can move millions instantly, without delay or consequence, influence becomes lighter and more dangerous. Not because people are weaker, but because systems no longer slow persuasion down. So as we move forward, we're no longer asking whether Churchill would make a great podcaster. We're asking something far more uncomfortable. Would a Churchill even survive in a world where voices are By section 7, the question flips one last time, because survival isn't the same as significance. In a modern audio landscape, Churchill might survive. He might even thrive for a while. But would he matter in the same way? Today's most successful voices don't just speak, they perform alignment. They tell audiences what they already suspect, then sharpen it. They reduce complexity into identity. You're not just listening, you're joining. Churchill's strength, by contrast, was his refusal to flatter. He didn't tell Britain it was special, he told it the truth and demanded effort in return. That approach is risky now. Modern platforms reward emotional certainty, not emotional labor. Churchill asked listeners to endure discomfort, ambiguity, and sacrifice. Algorithms prefer outrage, validation, and speed. His long arcs, delayed payoffs, and earned hope would struggle in a system that punishes patience. And yet, this is where the story refuses to stay cynical. Because when moments of real crisis arrive, something strange happens. The noise loses value, volume stops mattering. People start searching, not for entertainment, but for grounding, for voices that don't hype, but hold. That's when Churchill-like voices re-emerge, not as influencers, not as brands, but as stabilizers. History suggests this cycle is unavoidable. In calm times, the loudest voices win. In dangerous times, the steadiest ones do. Which means the real lesson of Churchill as podcaster isn't about platforms at all. It's about responsibility. The ability to speak in a way that doesn't just move people, but supports them. That doesn't just command attention, but earns trust without abusing it. Those voices are rare. They're slower, less flashy, often ignored until they're needed. And that leaves us with a final unsettling realization. The most powerful voice in a society is rarely the most popular one. It's the one waiting quietly until everything else stops. By section 8, the absurd question we started with, what if Churchill was a podcast host, stops being absurd at all. It becomes diagnostic. Because when we strip away the anachronism, what we're really examining is a recurring human vulnerability. When systems fail, we listen harder. And when we listen harder, we hand over more power than we realize. Churchill never asked people to fact-check him in real time. He couldn't. He spoke into a one-way channel, and the public filled in the gaps with trust. That wasn't manipulation, it was necessity. But necessity doesn't erase risk, it only postpones it. In modern audio culture, that risk is amplified. The intimacy of voice bypasses defenses. You don't argue with a voice the same way you argue with text. A voice feels present, human, earnest, even when it's wrong. This is why audio persuasion has always been more potent than written propaganda. It feels like conversation, not instruction. Churchill benefited from that effect, but he also restrained it. He rarely personalized enemies. He avoided emotional excess. He didn't turn disagreement into betrayal. These weren't stylistic choices, they were ethical ones. That restraint is what separates leadership from performance. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The modern system actively discourages restraint. Ethical pacing loses to emotional spikes. Nuance loses to certainty. Silence loses to constant output. A Churchill who refused to oversimplify would be undercut by 10 voices who would. Which brings us to the final inversion of the question. It's not, what if Churchill was a podcaster? It's, what if podcasters were forced to act like Churchill? What if they had to live with the emotional consequences of their words? What if accuracy mattered more than engagement? What if silence was allowed, respected, even rewarded? Because history suggests something clear. Voices shape reality most when people are afraid. And fear is the most profitable emotion in media. Churchill didn't monetize fear, he managed it. That difference may be the most important one we've forgotten. So as this story closes, one last question lingers, one that doesn't belong to the past at all. When the next real crisis arrives, which voices will we trust to steady us, and which will simply profit from the noise? By section 9, we confront the quiet aftermath, the moment after the voice fades, when people are left alone with what they've absorbed. Because influence doesn't end when the microphone turns off. It lingers. It reshapes memory. It edits the past retroactively. Churchill's wartime voice didn't just guide Britain through danger, it rewired how that danger would be remembered. For many listeners, the war exists not as raw experience, but as narrated experience. Loss is framed, fear is contextualized, suffering is given shape. His words didn't erase trauma, but they organized it into something survivable. This is one of the most underestimated powers of long-form audio. It doesn't just inform the present, it curates the past. Modern creators do this constantly. They don't just comment on events, they decide which emotions get preserved and which fade. Over time, listeners don't remember what happened, they remember how it was explained to them. That explanation becomes memory. Memory becomes identity. Churchill's phrases outlived the war because they offered coherence. They told people who they had been when things were hardest. And that identity, resilient, defiant, enduring, became national myth. But myths come with blind spots. By smoothing chaos into narrative, voices also simplify. They compress complexity into moral clarity. This is comforting, but it costs nuance. Some experiences don't fit the story. Some failures are quietly excluded. Some doubts are never archived. Churchill's voice unified Britain, but it also overshadowed other voices: women, colonized subjects, dissenters, the exhausted. Their experiences didn't disappear, but they were absorbed into a larger, louder story. This isn't a moral indictment, it's a structural truth. Dominant voices don't just speak, they select. And that selection shapes what future generations believe was possible, acceptable, or inevitable. So here's the unsettling modern parallel. When today's voices narrate crises in real time, they aren't just influencing reactions, they're pre-writing history. They're deciding which emotions will be remembered as justified and which will be dismissed as weakness. The podcast doesn't end when the episode ends. It ends decades later when someone tries to remember what it all meant. And that raises one final haunting question. If voices can decide how suffering is remembered, who should be allowed to speak? By section 10, we arrive at the end of the arc and the beginning of responsibility. The story of Churchill as podcaster was never really about him. It was about us, about how easily we mistake a steady voice for a steady truth, about how quickly comfort becomes authority, and about how rarely we ask what a voice is doing to us while it's helping us cope. Churchill mattered because he spoke when listening was unavoidable. He was shaped by a moment that demanded gravity, restraint, and consequence. His voice carried weight because words still had friction, because they couldn't be taken back, clipped, or endlessly revised. Today, friction is gone. Voices multiply, messages vanish, accountability diffuses, and yet the psychological impact is stronger than ever. We live inside constant narration. Someone is always explaining the world to us, framing fear, assigning blame, offering certainty. The lesson of Churchill isn't that we need better voices, it's that we need better listeners. Listeners who recognize when they're outsourcing judgment. Listeners who notice when familiarity is replacing evidence. Listeners who understand that emotional relief isn't the same as truth. Churchill respected his audience enough to tell them hard things. He didn't infantilize them. He didn't soothe them into passivity. He asked them to endure. That may be the most radical thing a voice can do. So if Churchill were a podcaster today, his real legacy wouldn't be downloads or influence, it would be restraint, silence, careful words chosen not for impact, but for consequence. And that leaves us with the final, unavoidable question, one that doesn't belong to history at all. In a world full of voices, will we choose the ones that make us feel good or the ones that make us stronger? By section 11, we finally meet the shadow Churchill was always aware of, but spent his life trying not to become. Because every tool that steadies a nation has a twin that can break one. The same calm voice that reduces panic can normalize cruelty. The same repetition that builds resolve can build obedience. The same intimacy that creates trust can erase resistance. History is crowded with figures who sounded like Churchill but lacked his restraint. They spoke slowly, confidently, reassuringly. They framed suffering as necessary, dissent as weakness, and loyalty as virtue. Their audiences didn't feel manipulated, they felt protected. That's the danger. Influence doesn't announce itself as control, it arrives disguised as care. Churchill understood this risk instinctively. That's why he avoided total certainty, why he left space for doubt, why his language emphasized effort over destiny. He didn't promise victory because promises demand submission when they fail. He promised struggle because struggle preserves agency. The dark twin does the opposite. The dark twin tells you that thinking is optional, that complexity is sabotage, that disagreement is betrayal. It offers relief from uncertainty at the cost of independence. And once people accept that trade, they don't notice the loss until it's irreversible. What separates Churchill from demagogues isn't skill, it's ethics under pressure. He believed the audience was strong enough to handle truth. The dark twin believes the audience must be managed. And here's the most unsettling realization of all. Both sound the same at first. Early on, you can't hear the difference between leadership and control. Both are calm, both are confident, both promise stability. The divergence only appears later when one voice encourages resilience and the other encourages dependence. This is why voice-based power is uniquely dangerous. It doesn't need violence, it doesn't need censorship, it just needs time. Time spent listening, time spent trusting, time spent letting someone else carry the burden of meaning. Churchill survived this temptation because he feared it. He treated words as irreversible acts. Many modern voices don't fear that power, they chase it. And that brings us to the most chilling thought of the entire documentary. The problem isn't that people listen too much, it's that the wrong voices want to be listened.
By section 12, the documentary slows down because the most powerful moment in the story is the one where nothing is said. After years of speaking, Churchill learned when not to. There were moments after disasters, after political missteps, after moral ambiguity, when he chose restraint over reassurance. No immediate framing, no emotional guidance, just space. That silence wasn't weakness, it was trust. Trust that people could sit with uncertainty without being guided toward a conclusion. This is almost unthinkable in modern media. Today, silence is treated as failure. If you don't respond instantly, someone else will. If you don't explain an event, it will be explained for you, usually badly. The pressure to speak has become absolute, and that pressure corrodes judgment. Churchill resisted it because he understood something rare. Not every moment needs narrative. Some moments need digestion. Some need grief. Some need time to remain unresolved. Silence forces audiences to do their own meaning-making. It returns agency. It prevents emotional outsourcing. In that sense, silence is the most democratic form of leadership. But it's also the hardest, because silence doesn't earn applause, it doesn't trend, it doesn't feel productive, and it offers no protection. When you say nothing, you can't control interpretation. Churchill accepted that risk. He believed that controlling emotion too tightly would infantilize the public. He preferred uncertainty to dependency. This is the final reversal of the podcast analogy. The highest form of voice isn't speech, it's restraint. And this may be the most relevant lesson of all for our era. When voices are endless, the one that stops speaking creates space for thought. When everyone is explaining, the one who pauses invites reflection. So, the documentary ends not with a monologue, but with an absence, a reminder that the strongest leaders aren't those who always have something to say, but those who know when saying nothing protects the future.